Welcome, intrepid political scientists. We are talking about scientific standards of evidence and how the QAnon conspiracy fantasy violates almost every single one of them. So, QAnon builds on Pizzagate. We still have a nefarious conspiracy of Satanist pedophiles, but now they are fighting Trump. Trump, in this scenario, is a hero fighting a secret war against these Satanist pedophiles who are trying to overthrow him. Now, before, the Satanist pedophiles in Pizzagate, they're just the Hillary Clinton, but now it's a much larger conspiracy. It is a deep state plot. Deep state meaning lots of longtime government officials. And so there are people, in the federal bureaucracy who are connected to this, and also Bill and Hillary Clinton, and also former President Obama, and also a guy named George Soros, who is a Hungarian Jewish billionaire who is the focus of a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy fantasies. And Hollywood celebrities like Oprah and Chrissy Teigen, I don't know, are supposedly all part of this Satanist pedophile ring trying to overthrow President Obama. In 2019, the FBI, this is the federal law enforcement agency, right? It works for President Trump. It's part of President Trump's executive branch. He nominated the director. And the FBI, probably thinking about the attack on the pizzeria, identified QAnon as a potential risk for domestic terrorism. This was a warning that they put out that this concept that was blowing up across the internet could lead to violence. Now, surely, Mr. McKenzie, this is just a fringe phenomenon, right? No serious people actually believe this. Well, I wish I could tell you that. Meet William Armacost. He's the mayor of Sequim. And he is an adherent of the Q conspiracy fantasy. He claims that it teaches you to think for yourself. But he's not alone. About a month ago, an outfit called Civics did a poll about QAnon, and here are the results. So, the good news is you do have a relatively large percentage of people who, reject the QAnon conspiracy. Some people who were blissfully unaware of the QAnon conspiracy concept, you might have been blissfully among them until now. A lot of people not sure. Notice that there's a partisan split, right? Democrats much more likely to reject, Republicans much more likely to support. There are also racial trends. College education seems to be helpful for inoculating one against the nonsense that is the QAnon theory. Now, I will say, in defense of the mostly true and some parts are true and unsure percentages here, that this is a relatively poorly worded survey question, right? They ask about the QAnon theory without they don't throw down concepts of Satanism or pedophilia, which probably would reduce the amount of agreement that we're seeing. They use the deep state phrase, which is a buzzword in conservative and Republican circles. So a lot of people might hear this question and hear deep state and think, oh yeah, I've heard about there being some deep state resistance to President Trump. And so the affirmative answers might be reflecting deep suspicions of the deep state, that is, longtime government officials, and might not be endorsement of the more outlandish aspects of the QAnon theory. But we have to assume that many of the people answering these questions are familiar with the more outlandish aspects of the QAnon. And like if even half the people who are saying, yeah, some parts are true, or yeah, that's mostly true, if even half of those people really believe that and are really familiar with that, that's deeply disturbing to people who want to live in a scientific, fact-based world with empiricist epistemology. This brings us to the Sagan standard. That gentleman on the right is Carl Sagan. He was an astronomer, but more than that, he was most famous as a popularizer of science, a great explainer of science to common people. And he wrote a great book about this called The Demon-Haunted World, and one of the rules that he elucidated was this one. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? If the claim is that there's this sinister conspiracy among politicians and financial elites and Hollywood celebrities, and there are Satanists who enslave and abuse children, that is an extraordinary claim. And no one should believe extraordinary claims unless there is an extraordinary amount and quality of evidence that is supporting that. And this is obviously not true in the case of the QAnon conspiracy fantasy. Now, Sagan did not invent the Sagan standard. He just said it best. A social scientist, Thomas Jefferson, an early political scientist, in early modern history, put it this way: 1,000 phenomena present themselves daily which we cannot explain. But where facts are suggested, bearing no analogy with the laws of nature as yet known to us, their verity needs proofs proportioned to their difficulty. That was Jefferson's sort of convoluted way of saying extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It is an old idea. Now, by the way, while we're on the subject of conspiracy fantasies, nearly all of them are false. Nearly all of them fail the Sagan standard, right? In Jefferson's time, a lot of people believed that there was an evil plot by the Pope, and the Pope had infiltrated the government of Britain and was pulling the strings on George III in Parliament, and this papist plot, that is popish plot, there was a Catholic conspiracy to enslave and take freedom away from the American people. Well, there's no evidence that was true. That was fake. You know what else was fake? For, I don't know, about 10 centuries, people in Europe and then people of European descent in North America were believing that there was this evil plot by Jewish financiers. The George Soros stuff is very much in line with that. It was the same kind of allegations that Jews eat Christian babies and drink blood. None of that was true either. The idea that there was a huge conspiracy behind the JFK or MLK assassinations, Martin Luther King, President Kennedy, false. The idea that the government is covering up evidence of alien visits, false. All of these are extraordinary claims. They require extraordinary evidence, particularly because in every case, the claim involves an improbably large number of people keeping something really wicked and big secret. And you know what people are bad at? Keeping secrets. You probably know this in your own life. You've probably had people try to keep you've probably wanted people to keep certain things secret for you before, and you've probably often been disappointed by their failure to do so. Well, this is not a unique phenomena. This is normal in human life. The more people involved, the harder it is to hide something. Our founders knew about that too. Benjamin Franklin wrote, 3, by which he means 3 people, 3 may keep a secret, if 2 of them are dead. In other words, people have big mouths, and sooner or later, somebody's going to blab. Now, nearly all conspiracy fantasies are false, but there have been real conspiracies in history. What tends to be true is that real conspiracies, a conspiracy by legal definition is any time two people get together to plan and pull off a crime. And that, of course, really does happen. And successful conspiracies involve few people because they're following this Franklin rule, right? The more people who know, the harder it is to hide. And they usually come to light anyway. To invoke a safe historical example, President Nixon, running for re-election in 1972, commits crimes to get re-elected. These crimes are revealed within a couple years of the election. He is forced to resign to avoid impeachment and conviction. Now, other conspiracies take a little longer to cook. When he got elected the first time in 1968, President Nixon sabotaged the peace process. His predecessor, President Johnson, was on the verge of getting the U.S. out of the Vietnam War, and Nixon, through back channels, blew up the peace negotiations to make sure that there'd be no peace deal before the election, because he was afraid if there was a peace deal before the election, he'd lose the election. And it worked. He blew up the peace deal. He won the election. It didn't work out so well for, American soldiers or for Vietnam because the war went on for another 5 years. Anyway, this stuff, that secret was known to relatively few people, and that didn't come out for another 20 years before, evidence started trickling out, and 30 years after the fact, really solid evidence. But the moral of the story is, if you do something dirty, eventually, people are going to find out. Someone's going to talk. Evidence will surface. You will get busted. Now, political science is one of many social sciences we've already seen. There's a handy chart there on the right that lists major fields of social science and their specific academic foci. Yeah, the plural of focus is foci. But if you say that, people probably won't know what you mean, so people just say focuses. Anyway, all the social sciences have in common, they're all studying people, right? That's what the social is, social science, science of people. They're all using empirical objective evidence, and it's important to know that social scientists often work across fields. That is, they're not operating in silos independently of one another, right? Political scientists read historians. Historians read economists, and vice versa. And it's encouraged, in fact, to use findings from allied fields, right? A historian and a political scientist and an anthropologist, they might all be studying the same question, and they can learn a lot from one another because they're using slightly different approaches. Now, journalism is not classified as a social science, but it's using a lot of the same rules, right? When you're doing persuasive or informational writing in your English class, it's a lot of the same rules that we use in natural science and social science. That is, when you make a claim, you're supposed to support it with evidence, right? So the kind of remarkable thing, whether you're in English or math or science or civics or history, is you're kind of always doing the same thing. You're always working with evidence. You're always, your job is, if other people are making claims, your job is to assess the claims other people are making. And if you are making claims, your job is to back up what you're asserting with evidence.